The scream that tore from Hannah Mercer's throat wasn't fear, it was recognition. Her daughter's small footprints disappeared into the canyon where 3 men had been found dead last month, and the golden pony's reins lay trampled in mud, still wet with something dark. Hannah ran, her widow's skirts catching on sagebrush, because in Red Rock, Wyoming, the canyon didn't give back what it took. But when she found Maisie kneeling beside a half-dead stranger with a cattleman's badge and bullet holes in his coat, Hannah understood. Sometimes the canyon gives you exactly what will destroy you. If you're wondering whether a widow's quiet life can survive a man who brings violence to her door, or if love can grow in ground soaked with blood, then stay with me until the very end, and comment below with your city so I can see how far this story travels. The wind that morning carried the smell of thaw and rot, the particular scent of a Wyoming spring that couldn't decide whether to freeze or flood. Hannah Mercer stood in her doorway with coffee going cold in her tin cup, watching the mud claim another inch of her fence line. The posts her husband had set 5 years ago leaned like tired old men, and she'd spent the better part of March trying to shore them up with wire and prayers that didn't seem to reach past the low gray clouds. "Mama, Sundance is loose again." Hannah turned to find Maisie already halfway across the yard, her daughter's copper braids flying behind her like warning flags. The child was 7 years old and afraid of absolutely nothing, which terrified Hannah in ways she couldn't articulate even to herself. "Maisie, stop!" But the girl was already scrambling over the crooked gate, chasing the flash of golden hide that disappeared into the scrub oak. Sundance was barely a pony, more like a large dog with delusions of grandeur, but Maisie loved him with the kind of fierce devotion that made Hannah's chest ache. She set down her coffee and grabbed her shawl, her boots already caked with yesterday's mud. The homestead sat at the edge of Red Rock proper, close enough to call for help, but far enough that help wouldn't hear you scream. Beyond the fence line, the land rolled in long waves of winter-killed grass and scattered stone until it dropped into the canyon, a slash in the earth so deep and narrow that locals claimed it had its own weather. Men went into the canyon to hunt or hide, and sometimes they didn't come back. Last month it had been 3 of them, found with their throats cut and their horses scattered, and the sheriff had warned everyone to stay clear until they knew what they were dealing with. Hannah knew what they were dealing with. Land too big and law too thin, the kind of country that swallowed people whole. "Maisie!" Her voice cracked across the scrub. "You stop right now!" The girl didn't stop. She never did. Hannah's late husband, Thomas, had called it spirit, that stubborn brightness that made Maisie run toward things instead of away. Hannah called it the thing that would get her killed. She moved faster, her skirts catching on brush, her breath coming hard. Ahead she could see Maisie's small shape silhouetted against the canyon's edge, the child standing with her hands on her hips like she was scolding the landscape itself. "He went down there, Mama. I can hear him." "Maisie, you step back from that edge right now." Hannah reached her daughter and grabbed her shoulder, pulling her away from the drop. The canyon opened like a wound below them, walls of red rock and shadow, the bottom invisible in the morning mist. "But Sundance, I'll get him. You stay here." "But Mama," "Maisie Grace, you plant yourself right here, or so help me, I will tie you to a fence post." Hannah's voice came out harder than she meant, but fear did that, turned love into something with edges. The girl's face crumpled, and Hannah felt the familiar guilt rise like water. She softened her grip, smoothed a hand over Maisie's hair. "Please, sweetheart, just stay here. I'll bring him back." Maisie nodded, her bottom lip trembling, and Hannah hated this. Hated that the world required her to choose between her daughter's feelings and her daughter's safety. Hated that she had to be both soft and hard. Hated that Thomas wasn't here to help carry the weight of it. She turned toward the canyon and started down. The path was barely a path, more like a suggestion scratched into stone by animals and desperate men. Hannah moved carefully, testing each foothold, her hands finding purchase on rocks still cold from winter. Below, she could hear water moving, that spring-fed creek that ran year-round and turned the canyon floor into a ribbon of green, even when the land above lay brown and dead. "Sundance!" her voice echoed off the walls. "You foolish creature! Where are you?" A whinny answered, high and nervous, and Hannah followed the sound deeper into the canyon. The walls rose around her, cutting off the sky, and the temperature dropped 10 degrees. Down here, Winter still had teeth. She found the pony standing near a rock fall, his lead rope tangled in dead brush. He stamped and snorted when he saw her, clearly pleased with himself for causing maximum trouble. "You're a menace," Hannah muttered, reaching for the rope. An absolute... The smell hit her before her eyes made sense of what she was seeing. Blood. Fresh enough that she could taste copper on the air, old enough that it had dried into the dirt in dark patches that looked like oil in the weak light. And there, half hidden in the shadow of the rock fall, a boot, attached to a leg, attached to a man who wasn't moving. Hannah's hand went to the knife on her belt, the one Thomas had given her years ago, with the instruction to use it on anything that threatened her or Maisie, and she moved closer. Sundance pulled against the rope, trying to back away, but she held firm. The man lay on his side, his face turned away from her, one arm flung out like he'd tried to catch himself when he fell. His coat was dark leather, shredded across the shoulders like something with claws had tried to peel him open. His hat lay a few feet away, trampled into the mud, and his gun belt was empty. No pistol, no knife, nothing but leather and brass buckles that caught the light. Hannah crouched down, still gripping the knife, and reached out to touch his neck. His skin was cold, but not corpse cold, and after a moment she felt it. A pulse, thin and thready, but there. "Sir?" Her voice sounded too loud in the canyon's silence. "Can you hear me?" No response. She pushed at his shoulder, trying to turn him, and that's when she saw the badge pinned to what was left of his vest. Not a marshal's star, not a sheriff's shield, but something else. A stamped brass circle with an ornate C in the center, and the words Wyoming Cattlemen's Association engraved around the rim. Her stomach dropped. The Cattlemen's Association didn't send men to Red Rock for social calls. They sent them when herds went missing, when homesteaders got too bold about water rights, when someone needed to be reminded that land ownership and power weren't always the same thing. And if someone had ambushed one of their men and left him to die in this canyon, then trouble was already here. It had just been waiting for her to stumble into it. Hannah sat back on her heels, her mind racing. The smart thing would be to walk away, take Sundance home, tell the sheriff she'd found nothing. The safe thing would be to let this man become the canyon's problem instead of hers. But when she looked at his face, angular and weather-beaten, a scar cutting through his left eyebrow, stubble dark against pale skin, she saw Thomas. Not in the features, but in the stillness, that terrible absence of movement that meant life was draining away by degrees. She'd watched Thomas die in their bed with the window open and spring light on his face, pneumonia taking him inch by inch while she held his hand and pretended she could will him to stay. She'd sworn after burying him that she would never watch another person slip away when there was something, anything, she could do about it. "You're going to regret this," she told the unconscious man. Then she hauled him upright. It took 20 minutes to get him onto Sundance's back, 20 minutes of dragging dead weight, coaxing the pony to hold still, and trying not to think about the blood soaking into her dress. The man groaned once when she draped him across the saddle, a sound more animal than human, but he didn't wake. She led the pony up the canyon path, her arms shaking from exertion, her heart hammering against her ribs. At the top, Maisie stood exactly where Hannah had left her, her small face white with anxiety. "Mama, who is that?" "I don't know, baby, but we're going to help him." "Is he dead?" "Not yet." Maisie chewed her lip, her eyes too old for her face. "Should we get the sheriff?" Hannah considered this. Red Rock's sheriff was a decent enough man, but he was also a man who understood which way power flowed in this territory. If the Cattlemen's Association wanted this man dead, telling the sheriff meant signing his death warrant. And if someone had tried to kill him once, they'd try again, harder, and with more bodies in the way. "Not yet," Hannah said. "Help me get him to the house." They moved slowly, the pony protesting every step, the man's weight shifting precariously. By the time they reached the cabin, Hannah's shoulders burned and her hands were cramping. Maisie ran ahead to open the door, and together they managed to slide the stranger off Sundance and onto the floor just inside the threshold. Hannah knelt beside him, her hands moving automatically now, checking pulse, breathing, pupils. His coat was ruined, slashed to ribbons, but underneath the leather his shirt was mostly intact. She peeled it back carefully and found what she'd been dreading. 2 bullet wounds, one in his left shoulder and one that had grazed his ribs. The shoulder wound still wept blood, and the edges of the torn flesh looked angry and hot. Maisie, I need the medical kit, and boil water, as much as you can. The girl ran to obey, her feet quick on the cabin floor, and Hannah took a breath. She'd learned field medicine from necessity, treating Thomas and herself and Maisie through the small disasters of frontier life, but this was different. Bullets meant extraction, meant infection, meant the kind of pain that would wake a man from unconsciousness and make him wish he'd stayed dead. She worked efficiently, cutting away the ruined shirt, cleaning the wounds with whiskey that cost more than she could afford to waste. The shoulder bullet was lodged deep, and she had to dig for it with a thin knife sterilized in flame while the stranger's body convulsed in broken reflex. She felt the metal, hooked it, pulled, and the bullet came free in a wash of fresh blood that made her stomach turn. Maisie appeared at her elbow with clean cloth, her face set in concentration. What can I do? Pack this wound while I work on the other one. They fell into rhythm, mother and daughter, their hands moving in concert. The second wound was cleaner, just a deep graze that needed stitching. Hannah threaded a needle with steady fingers and began to sew, her stitches small and even, the kind that would minimize scarring if he lived long enough for it to matter. By the time she finished, the sun had climbed high enough to send light through the cabin's single window, and the stranger's breathing had evened out into something that sounded less like dying. Hannah sat back, her dress stained rust red, her hands trembling now that the emergency had passed. Maisie leaned against her side. What's his name? I don't know. Hannah looked at the man on her floor, this stranger who had brought danger into their lives just by existing. But we'll ask him when he wakes up. If he wakes up, she thought, but didn't say. She stood, her knees popping, and went to the door. Outside, the day had turned bright and cold, the kind of weather that made Wyoming beautiful and cruel. She could see her fence line sagging, the garden plot that needed turning, the dozen small repairs that consumed her days and left her too exhausted to do anything but collapse into bed. And now this. A man with a cattleman's badge and bullet holes, trouble she couldn't afford, and danger she couldn't name. But when she turned back to look at him, at the rise and fall of his chest, the stark lines of pain in his unconscious face, she felt something she hadn't felt in the 3 years since Thomas died. Not attraction, not yet, just the simple human relief of not being completely alone. Mama? Maisie's voice was small. Did we do the right thing? Hannah thought about the smart thing, the safe thing, the 100 reasons she should have left him in that canyon. I don't know, she said honestly, but it's done now. She closed the door and went to make coffee because there was nothing else to do but wait and see whether she'd saved a life or invited a catastrophe. The stranger didn't wake that day, or the next. Hannah kept him on a pallet near the fire, changing his bandages every few hours, forcing water between his lips when he seemed restless. Infection was her main worry. The wounds were clean, but clean didn't mean safe. Not out here where doctors were 50 miles away and medicine meant whatever you could grow or barter for. Maisie helped with the nursing, her small hands gentle when she bathed his face with cool water or tucked blankets around his shoulders. The child had adopted him already. Hannah could see that, the way she'd adopted every hurt creature that crossed their path. Last summer it had been a magpie with a broken wing, and before that a barn cat missing half an ear. Maisie had the kind of heart that couldn't leave things broken. Hannah envied that sometimes. Her own heart had learned caution the hard way. On the third day, she went through the stranger's belongings, searching for anything that might tell her who he was and what kind of trouble he'd brought. His coat was unsalvageable, but his saddlebags had survived mostly intact. She found spare ammunition, a whetstone, a tin of coffee grounds, and a leather-bound ledger filled with neat columns of numbers and brand marks. Cattle tallies, hundreds of head, tracked by owner and location, with notes in the margins about disputed boundaries and suspected rustling. The most recent entries were dated 2 weeks ago and marked with increasingly urgent shorthand. 40 head missing, Hart Ranch. 60 head, Canyon Creek. Brand altered, Check McKenzie Holdings. Hart. The name appeared over and over, both as an owner and as the signature at the bottom of each page. Hannah flipped to the inside cover and found it stamped there in fading ink. Property of Caleb Hart, Range Detective. Range detective. That explained the badge and the bullets. Men who tracked stolen cattle had a way of ending up dead in canyons, especially when they got too close to whoever was doing the stealing. She tucked the ledger back into the saddlebag and felt something else. A small leather pouch, worn smooth by handling. Inside, a stack of letters tied with string, their edges soft with age. She pulled the first one free and unfolded it, feeling guilty, but not guilty enough to stop. Caleb, another month gone and no word from you. I know the work takes you far, but your sister worries. Spring roundup starts soon and we're short-handed. If you're not dead in a ditch somewhere, come home. Your brother, James. The next letter was similar, and the one after that. A family that missed him. A brother who wrote with the kind of blunt affection that men used when they were afraid of sounding soft. The most recent letter was only 3 months old. Caleb, someone's hitting the ranches hard. 40, 60 head at a time, gone overnight with no trail to follow. Association hired you to stop this, and now you've vanished too. If you're alive, get word to us. If you're not, I'll bury you next to Pa and tell him you died being stubborn. J. Hannah folded the letters carefully and put them back. Caleb Hart, a man with family, with work that mattered, with a brother who loved him enough to threaten his grave. A man she'd pulled from the canyon like a fish from a stream, and now he was her responsibility. She looked at him lying there, his face slack in fever sleep, and wondered what price she'd pay for this mercy. He woke on the 4th night, violent and sudden. Hannah had dozed off in the chair beside his pallet, her chin dropping to her chest, when his hand shot out and grabbed her wrist hard enough to bruise. Her eyes snapped open to find him staring at her with pupils blown wide, his face slick with sweat, his breathing harsh and ragged. Where? His voice was rusted metal. Where am I? You're safe. Hannah kept her voice level, the way she did with spooked horses. My name is Hannah Mercer. You're in my home, outside Red Rock. Do you remember what happened? His grip on her wrist tightened, and for a moment she thought he might pull her down, might hurt her without meaning to, but then his eyes focused and he let go like he'd been burned. Canyon, he managed. 3 of them. Took the herd. Left me. You've been shot twice. I removed the bullets, but you've had fever for 3 days. She reached for the water cup. Can you drink? He nodded, and she helped him sit up enough to take small sips. He drank like a man dying of thirst, and she had to pull the cup away before he made himself sick. Easy. You'll have more in a minute. He fell back against the blankets, his chest heaving. In the firelight, she could see him clearly for the first time since pulling him from the canyon, the sharp planes of his face, the scar through his eyebrow, gray eyes that moved constantly like he was cataloging every detail of the room. You're the woman who found me. It wasn't a question. My daughter and I. Your horse? Well, our pony led us to you. How long? 4 days. He processed this, his jaw working. Anyone else know I'm here? No. Keep it that way. His hand moved to his shoulder, probing the bandages, and he winced. They'll come back. If they know I'm alive. Who will come back? The men who did this. His eyes found hers, and there was something in them that made her pulse jump, not fear, but recognition. The look of someone who understood exactly how bad things could get. They're not just rustlers. They're organized, smart, and they don't leave witnesses. Hannah thought of Maisie sleeping in the loft, of the thin door and the empty yard, of how far they were from help. Then we won't tell anyone you're here, she said. He studied her for a long moment, and she had the sense of being measured, weighed, assessed for capability. You should have left me in that canyon, he said finally. Probably. Why didn't you? Hannah stood, brushing off her skirt, suddenly tired of this conversation and everything it implied. Because I'm not the kind of person who leaves people to die, even when it would be smarter to. She turned toward the kitchen, needing to do something with her hands, but his voice stopped her. Thank you. The words were quiet, almost too quiet to hear, but they hit her like a physical thing. She nodded without turning around and went to stoke the fire, letting the motion and the warmth push back against the cold worry that had taken root in her chest. Behind her, Caleb Hart closed his eyes and slipped back into exhausted sleep, and Hannah sat in her chair and wondered how long they had before the men who'd tried to kill him realized their mistake and came to correct it. Morning came with the smell of coffee and frying bacon, and Caleb woke to find a small girl sitting cross-legged on the floor 3 feet from his face, staring at him with unblinking intensity. "You're awake again," she announced. "Mama said you might be." He blinked, disoriented, his body one massive ache. "Who are you?" "Maisie. I'm 7. You're Caleb, and you almost died, and Mama fixed you, and now you're going to be okay probably unless infection gets you, which Mama says happens sometimes even when you do everything right." She delivered this information in one continuous stream without pausing for breath. "Are you hungry?" He tried to sit up and immediately regretted it, pain lancing through his shoulder. "Yeah, I think so." "Good. Mama's making breakfast. She said I could wake you up if you looked less dead." Maisie tilted her head, considering. "You still look pretty dead, but better than yesterday." Despite everything, Caleb felt his mouth twitch. "Thanks." "You're welcome. Do you want to see Sundance? He's the one who found you. Mama says he's the smartest pony in Wyoming, even though he keeps getting loose and causing trouble." "Maybe later." "Okay." Maisie stood with the boundless energy of childhood. "I'll tell Mama you're awake and hungry and not dead yet." She bounded toward the kitchen, leaving Caleb to take stock of his situation. The cabin was small but well kept, the kind of place that spoke of limited means and maximum care. A fire burned in the stone hearth, and shelves lined one wall with preserves and supplies. Above him, a loft disappeared into shadow, and through the single window he could see gray morning light and the edge of a fence line. Hannah appeared from the kitchen carrying a tray, tin plate with eggs and bacon, more coffee that smelled like heaven. She set it on the floor beside him and helped him sit up, propping him against the wall with surprising strength. "Eat slow," she instructed. "Your stomach needs time to remember what food is." He obeyed, forking eggs into his mouth and trying not to think about how long it had been since he'd eaten anything besides hardtack and jerky. The food was simple but good, seasoned with care, and he cleaned the plate while Hannah watched with an expression he couldn't quite read. "Better?" she asked when he finished. "Much. Thank you." He hesitated. "I need to ask you something." "Go ahead." "In my saddlebags, there's a ledger, gray leather. Did you—" "I found it." She met his eyes without flinching. "I needed to know who you were and what you'd brought into my home." Fair enough. He'd have done the same. "Then you know what I do." "Range detective for the Cattlemen's Association, tracking stolen herds." She sat in the chair across from him, her hands folded in her lap. "And someone didn't like you getting close." "3 riders. They hit me at dawn, ran off my horse, took everything they could carry." He touched his shoulder again, remembering. "I played dead until they left, then tried to make it out of the canyon. Didn't get far." "The men who did this, do you know who they are?" "Not yet, but they're part of something bigger, a network." He leaned his head back against the wall, exhaustion already pulling at him. "I've been tracking them for months. They're stealing hundreds of head, altering brands, moving cattle across territorial lines. Someone's coordinating it, someone with resources and connections." Hannah was quiet for a moment, processing. "And now they think you're dead." "For now, but when they don't find my body—" He didn't finish, didn't need to. "Then we keep you hidden until you're strong enough to leave." "It could be weeks." "I know. And if they find out you're harboring me, then I'll deal with it." Her voice was flat, final. "You're here now, Mr. Hart. We don't do things halfway." He looked at her then, really looked, at the determined set of her jaw, the shadows under her eyes, the way her hands gripped the chair arms like she was holding herself steady through sheer will. She was afraid. He could see that, but she wasn't backing down. "Call me Caleb," he said, "and I'll be gone as soon as I can ride." "Good." She stood, collecting his plate. "Until then, you follow my rules. You don't go outside, you don't show yourself at the windows, and if anyone comes to the door, you hide. Understand?" "Yes, ma'am." A ghost of a smile touched her mouth. "And don't ma'am me. I'm not that old yet." She carried the dishes to the kitchen, leaving Caleb to stare at the ceiling beams and wonder how a woman with a child and no husband had ended up brave enough or foolish enough to take in a man marked for death. In the loft above, Maisie's voice drifted down, singing something tuneless and happy, and Caleb closed his eyes and tried not to think about what would happen if the men who'd left him in that canyon ever found their way to this door. The days developed a rhythm. Hannah would wake before dawn to tend the animals, chickens, Sundance, the milk cow who gave barely enough to justify her feed. Then breakfast for 3, with Maisie chattering enough for all of them and Caleb eating slowly, still rebuilding strength. After breakfast, Hannah would change his bandages while he sat stone-faced and silent, refusing to acknowledge the pain. And then she'd leave him to rest while she tackled the endless work of keeping a homestead running. Caleb watched her more than he should, watched the efficiency of her movements, the way she never wasted motion or time, the calluses on her hands and the set of her shoulders that said she'd been carrying weight alone for too long. She wore the same dress 3 days running, mended in places, the hem stained with mud, and he realized with a start that she probably only owned 2 or 3. On the 5th day of consciousness, he tried to stand, made it about 3 steps before his legs buckled and Hannah caught him, her body surprisingly solid under his weight. "Stubborn," she muttered, helping him back to the pallet. "I need to move. Can't heal lying down." "Can't heal at all if you tear open your stitches." But she didn't sound entirely unsympathetic. "Give it another few days, then we'll get you walking." Those few days passed in a strange, suspended reality. Maisie adopted him as a source of entertainment, bringing him things to look at. Interesting rocks, drawings on scrap paper, a beetle in a jar that she swore was her friend. She asked him questions with the fearless curiosity of childhood. Had he ever shot anyone? Did bullets hurt? What was his horse's name? Did he have a wife? That last one made Hannah look up sharply from the bread dough she was kneading. "No wife," Caleb said. "Why not?" Maisie demanded. "You're old." "Maisie," Hannah's voice was sharp. "That's rude." "But Mama, he is old. He's at least 30. Despite himself, Caleb laughed, a rusty sound that made his ribs ache. 28, actually, and I've been too busy to think about marriage." "Too busy almost dying?" Maisie asked with perfect 7-year-old logic. "Something like that." The girl considered this. "Mama doesn't want to get married again either. She says men are more trouble than they're worth." Maisie Grace Mercer. Hannah's face flushed deep red. "That's enough. Go check the chickens." "I checked them an hour ago." "Then check them again." Maisie rolled her eyes in the exaggerated way of children everywhere and flounced toward the door, leaving Caleb and Hannah in awkward silence. "I'm sorry," Hannah said finally, not meeting his eyes. "She doesn't have a filter." "It's fine. She's right anyway, about men being trouble." "Some men." Hannah shaped the dough with firm hands, her movements precise. "My husband wasn't. He was good, gentle. He died 3 years ago come June, and I miss him every single day." The rawness in her voice made Caleb look away, giving her privacy in her grief. "How?" "Pneumonia. Came on fast, took him slow. Doctor couldn't do anything but give him laudanum for the pain." She punched the dough harder than necessary. "He was 32. That's not old enough to die." "No," Caleb agreed quietly. "It's not." They didn't speak again for a while, just the sound of Hannah working and the fire crackling, and outside Maisie singing to the chickens about a man who almost died, but didn't. That night, Caleb dreamed of the canyon, of the moment when he'd realized the riders weren't just passing through, they were hunting him. The sound of guns firing, the impact of bullets, the long fall, and the certainty that he was dying alone in the dirt. He woke with his hand reaching for a weapon that wasn't there, his breathing harsh, and found Hannah sitting in the chair beside his pallet. "You were shouting," she said. "I thought—" "I'm fine." He forced his breathing to slow. "Sorry, didn't mean to wake you." "You didn't. I don't sleep much these days." She had a quilt wrapped around her shoulders, her hair loose from its daytime bun, and in the firelight she looked younger, softer. "The dream's bad?" "Bad enough." She nodded like she understood. "Thomas comes to me sometimes in dreams. Not the way he was at the end, but before. Healthy, laughing, the man I married. And then I wake up and remember he's gone, and it feels like losing him all over again. I'm sorry. Don't be. It's life out here. We lose people. We keep going. That's the deal we make when we choose this place. She pulled the quilt tighter. But sometimes I wonder if the price is too high. Caleb thought about his brother's letters, the family ranch he barely saw, the work that had consumed 3 years of his life and nearly killed him. Yeah, he said. Sometimes I wonder that too. They sat in companionable silence until Hannah's breathing evened out, and she dozed in the chair, her head tipped back, her face finally at rest. Caleb watched the fire and wondered what it said about him that lying here in this woman's cabin, broken and hunted, was the safest he'd felt in years. Morning light found Caleb standing at the window for the first time, his hand braced against the frame, his legs shaking but holding. Hannah had protested when he'd pulled himself upright, but he'd waved her off with a stubbornness she was beginning to recognize as fundamental to his character. If I don't start moving, I'll forget how, he'd said, and she'd stopped arguing because she understood that kind of determination, the kind born of necessity and fear of becoming helpless. Now, he stood looking out at her land, and she saw it through his eyes. The sagging fence line, the chicken coop with its patched roof, the garden plot still hard with frost, the whole operation held together with wire and hope and nothing else. She waited for judgment, for the subtle condescension she'd grown used to from men who thought a woman alone couldn't possibly manage, but when he spoke his voice carried only respect. You've done well here. Can't be easy, just the two of you. It's not. Hannah poured coffee, the morning ritual that anchored her days. But we manage. Thomas left me the deed clear at least. No bank breathing down my neck, no landlord to answer to, just the land and what we can make of it. That's more than most have. Caleb accepted the coffee cup, his fingers still stiff but steadier than yesterday. Land you own outright is worth defending. Something in his tone made her look up. You think someone might try to take it? Not specifically. But out here, people notice when a woman's alone on good ground near water. They start thinking about what could be theirs if they just waited long enough for her to give up. He sipped the coffee, his eyes still on the window. You've had trouble? Men coming around making offers. Hannah thought of Bill Henderson, who showed up drunk last summer with a ring and expectations. Of the land speculator from Cheyenne who'd offered her half what the property was worth and seemed offended when she refused. Of the casual assumptions that she'd eventually need a man to save her from herself. Nothing I couldn't handle, she said. That's not what I asked. No, it's not. She sat across from him, cradling her own cup. But answering would mean admitting I need protection, and I've spent 3 years proving I don't. Needing help isn't the same as being helpless. Caleb's gray eyes found hers. Took me a long time to learn that distinction. Before Hannah could respond, Maisie came thundering down from the loft, her feet hitting the floor like dropped sacks of grain. He's standing! Mama, look! He's actually standing. I see that, baby. Try not to shout this early. But it's exciting. Yesterday he could barely sit up, and now look. Maisie circled Caleb like he was a curiosity at a carnival. Can you walk? Can you go outside yet? Sundance wants to meet you properly. He's been asking. Caleb's mouth twitched. The pony's been asking? Well, not in words, but I can tell. Maisie was utterly serious. He saved your life, you know. The least you could do is thank him. Maisie, Mr. Hart needs to rest. I can make it to the porch, Caleb interrupted. If that's all right. Hannah wanted to say no, wanted to keep him hidden and safe, but she recognized the look in his eyes, the need to prove to himself that he was still functional, still a man who could walk under his own power. She'd seen that same look in Thomas's face in those last weeks, the desperate grasping at dignity. 5 minutes, she conceded, and if you fall, I'm leaving you where you drop. Fair enough. The walk to the door took longer than it should have, Caleb moving like an old man, his hand gripping the wall for support. But he made it, and when Hannah opened the door, the cold morning air hit them like a blessing. Caleb stood on the porch, breathing deep, his face tilted toward weak sunlight. God, I miss this, he said quietly. Maisie had already run to fetch Sundance, leading the little golden pony by his rope. The animal approached cautiously, snorting at Caleb's unfamiliar scent, but when Caleb extended his good hand, the pony nuzzled his palm with surprising gentleness. "He knows you're hurt," Maisie explained. "Animals always know." Caleb stroked the pony's nose, his expression softening in a way Hannah hadn't seen before. "Thank you," he told Sundance gravely, "for leading them to me. I owe you my life." Sundance whickered and butted his head against Caleb's chest, nearly knocking him over, and Maisie dissolved into giggles. "He likes you. That means you're family now. He doesn't like just anybody." Hannah felt something twist in her chest at those words. Family, spoken so easily by a child who didn't understand the weight they carried. She turned away, busying herself with adjusting the porch rail that didn't need adjusting, giving Caleb privacy for whatever emotion had just crossed his face. When she looked back, he was leaning against the post, his color better than it had been, but exhaustion showing in the set of his shoulders. "All right, that's enough for today," Hannah said firmly. "Back inside before you fall down." He didn't argue, which told her how much the short walk had cost him. They made it back to his pallet in slow stages, and he collapsed onto it with a groan he tried to suppress. "Told you," Hannah said, but not unkindly. "Worth it." Caleb closed his eyes. Needed to remember the sky was still there. Hannah understood that too well, the way Wyoming could make you feel both infinite and trapped, how the sky promised freedom while the land held you fast. She pulled a blanket over him and left him to rest, returning to the endless work that kept them fed and sheltered. The days that followed developed a new rhythm. Caleb grew stronger by increments, graduating from pallet to chair to short walks around the cabin. He insisted on helping despite Hannah's protests, sharpening knives that had gone dull, mending the broken hinge on the chicken coop door, showing Maisie how to tie knots that would hold under strain. Small things, but they lifted weight from Hannah's shoulders she hadn't realized she'd been carrying. He was careful around her, never crowding, always keeping proper distance. But sometimes she'd catch him watching her with an expression she couldn't read, something between gratitude and longing and a wariness that suggested he didn't trust easy feelings. On the 10th day, he asked about the fence. "The posts are rotting at the base," he said, gesturing toward the sagging line. "Another season, and they'll fall completely." "I know." Hannah didn't look up from the bread she was kneading. "Thomas and I were saving to replace them when he died. Now it's on the list of things I'll get to when I have money I don't have." "I could fix them." "You can barely walk the length of the cabin without sitting down." "I'm getting stronger every day, and I need to do something useful or I'll lose my mind." His voice carried an edge she hadn't heard before. Frustration, maybe, or shame at being dependent. "Let me help, Hannah, please." She studied him, weighing capability against pride, and recognized the desperation of a man who needed to feel valuable. "All right," she said finally, "but you work slow, you take breaks, and if I see you bleeding through your bandages, I'm dragging you back inside by your ear." "Yes, ma'am." He grinned, and for the first time she saw what he must have looked like before violence and work had carved lines into his face. Younger, lighter, almost boyish. They started that afternoon, Caleb showing Hannah how to brace the posts with rocks and stakes while he mixed pitch to seal the bases. He moved carefully, favoring his shoulder, but his hands were steady and his knowledge evident. This was a man who'd grown up working land, who understood wood and wire and the particular physics of Wyoming wind. Maisie helped by fetching tools and offering commentary. "Mama, did you know Caleb has a brother named James? And they have a ranch with 100 cows. And James writes letters, but Caleb never writes back because he's too busy not dying." "Maisie," Caleb said mildly, "that's not exactly—" "It's what the letter said. I can read, you know. Mama taught me." Hannah winced. "She went through your things while you were sleeping. I'm sorry, I should have—" "It's fine." Caleb hammered a stake with more force than necessary. "Nothing in those letters I'm ashamed of. James worries. That's what big brothers do." "Is he much older than you?" Hannah asked, genuinely curious now. 5 years. Raised me after our parents died. I was 14, thought I knew everything, gave him hell for years." Caleb's mouth quirked. "Joining the Cattlemen's Association was partly to make money, partly to get away before I said something I couldn't take back." We're better at loving each other from a distance." "That's sad," Maisie announced. "Family should be together." "Should and aren't always the same thing, little bit." Caleb's voice was gentle. "But you're right. Family's important. That's why I need to finish this job. The men stealing cattle are hitting small ranchers who can't afford losses. Families like yours, like mine. Someone has to stop them." "And that someone is you?" Hannah handed him the next post, their fingers brushing briefly. "That someone was supposed to be me, until they decided to put bullets in me instead." He positioned the post, testing its stability. "But I'm still alive, which means they made a mistake, and I don't intend to waste the second chance your kindness gave me." The words hung between them, weighted with meaning Hannah wasn't ready to examine. She turned back to her work, mixing pitch with hands that wanted to shake, and tried not to think about how easy it had become to have him here, how the cabin felt less empty, how Maisie laughed more, how she herself had started looking forward to morning coffee and evening conversation by the fire. Dangerous thoughts, those, the kind that led to hope, and hope was a luxury she couldn't afford. They worked until the sun started dropping toward the horizon, painting the sky in shades of copper and rose. 4 fence posts repaired wasn't much, but it was more than Hannah had managed in months of trying alone. She stood back, admiring their work, and felt Caleb move beside her. "Thank you," she said quietly, "for helping. You didn't have to." "Yes, I did." His voice was rough. "You saved my life. I can't repay that, but I can at least keep your fence standing." Hannah turned to look at him then, really look, at the tired lines around his eyes, the healing wound at his shoulder, the way he held himself like a man still expecting ambush. He'd been alone too long, she realized, fighting battles that never quite ended, carrying weight that should have been shared. "You don't owe me anything," she said, "but I'm glad you're here." The words came out more honest than she'd intended, and she saw something shift in his expression, surprise maybe, or the tentative beginning of trust. Before either of them could speak again, Maisie's voice rang out from the cabin. "Mama, someone's coming!" Hannah's heart dropped. She turned toward the road and saw dust rising in the distance, a rider approaching at an easy lope. Beside her, Caleb had gone still, his hand moving instinctively toward where his gun would be if he'd had one. "Inside," Hannah said sharply. "Now!" "Hannah? Now, Caleb. If it's trouble, you being seen makes it worse." He hesitated, clearly hating it, but nodded and moved toward the cabin with as much speed as his healing body allowed. Maisie met him at the door, her eyes wide, and Hannah saw her daughter take Caleb's hand and pull him inside with protective urgency that made her throat tight. Then she turned to face whatever was coming, her spine straight and her face composed, a widow alone defending her ground. The rider resolved into Bill Henderson, Red Rock's self-appointed voice of concern for unattached women. He was 50 if he was a day, with a belly that spoke of prosperity and a smile that never quite reached his eyes. He'd proposed to Hannah twice since Thomas died, each time with increasing agitation when she refused, and she'd learned to regard him the way she'd regard a snake in the grass, cautious, alert, ready to strike if necessary. "Mrs. Mercer!" He raised a hand in greeting, his horse dancing sideways. "Afternoon. Hope I'm not disturbing." "What can I do for you, Bill?" Hannah kept her voice neutral, her hands loose at her sides. "Just checking in like I do, making sure you and the little one are managing all right." He dismounted, his gaze sweeping over the fence line, the repaired posts, the tools still lying in the dirt. "Been doing some work, I see." Fence needed mending. That's heavy work for a woman alone. He smiled that oil-slick smile. "You should have sent word. I'd have brought some of my boys over to help. I managed fine. I'm sure you did. I'm sure you did." He moved closer, and Hannah held her ground even as every instinct screamed at her to step back. "But it's not right, you out here struggling. A woman like you needs a man's help, needs a man's protection." "I have everything I need, Bill. Thank you for your concern." "Do you?" His eyes narrowed, studying the cabin, and Hannah's pulse jumped. Could he sense Caleb inside? Could he smell trouble the way animals smelled weather? "Only I heard some interesting talk in town yesterday. Fellow passing through said he'd been hired to track some rustlers. Range detective for the Cattlemen's Association. Said he'd gone missing somewhere near the canyon." Hannah's face remained perfectly still. That's so? That's so. Sheriff's got men looking, but you know how it is. Canyon's big. Man could be anywhere. Could be dead. Could be alive and hiding. Bill took another step closer. You haven't seen any strangers around, have you, Hannah? Anyone who might be looking for help? No strangers, Hannah said flatly. Just you, Bill. And you're about to leave. His smile vanished. Now that's not very friendly. I'm not feeling friendly. You've checked on me, I've told you I'm fine, and now we're done. Get back on your horse and go home. Or what? He was close enough now that she could smell whiskey on his breath. You'll do what, exactly? You're out here alone with a child, and you're telling me to leave? That's not smart, Hannah. Not smart at all. Fear spiked through her sharp and cold, but she'd learned years ago not to let men like Henderson see it. She held his gaze, her hand sliding toward the knife at her belt, the one Caleb had sharpened yesterday until the edge gleamed. I'm telling you to leave because this is my land, and you're not welcome on it. That clear enough? For a moment she thought he might push it, might do something that would force her hand, and she was already calculating how hard she'd have to cut to make him understand she was serious. But then something shifted in his expression, not fear exactly, but recalculation. He stepped back, hands raised in mock surrender. All right, no need to get sharp with me. I'm just being neighborly. He mounted up, his smile returning but colder now. You take care, Hannah, and if you do see any strangers around, you let the sheriff know. For your own safety. He wheeled his horse and rode back toward town, the dust of his departure hanging in the air like a threat. Hannah stood perfectly still until he was out of sight. Then her knees buckled, and she sat hard on the ground, her breath coming in shakes. The cabin door opened and Caleb emerged, his face grim, a kitchen knife gripped in his good hand. You heard, Hannah said. It wasn't a question. Every word. He lowered himself down beside her, moving carefully. He knows I'm here. He's guessing, but he knows. He suspects. That's not the same thing. It is if he tells the right people. Caleb's jaw worked. I need to leave, tonight, before I bring worse trouble to your door. You can barely ride. I'll manage. You'll get yourself killed. Hannah turned to face him, anger flaring hot and sudden. You think I pulled you out of that canyon and stitched you back together so you could throw it away? You think I put my daughter at risk for a man too stubborn to accept help when he needs it? I'm trying to protect you. Then stop being an idiot and stay put. Her voice cracked. You leave now, weak and unarmed. They'll find you in a day. Maybe less. And then they'll know you were here, and they'll come asking questions I don't want to answer. So you staying is the safest thing for all of us. Understand? Caleb stared at her, something like awe in his expression. You're terrifying, you know that? Good. Someone needs to be. Hannah pushed herself upright, her legs still shaky. Now get inside before someone else rides by. He stood, slower, and for a moment they faced each other in the fading light. Two people who'd found each other by accident and were now bound by necessity and something else neither was willing to name. I won't let anything happen to you or Maisie, Caleb said quietly. That's a promise. I know. And she did. Whatever else Caleb Hart was, detective, fighter, brother, son, he was a man who kept his word. She could see it in every line of him, the kind of integrity that couldn't be faked or taught. Now come on, I'm making stew and you need to eat if you're going to keep getting stronger. They walked back to the cabin together, and behind them the fence post stood straight and true, held fast by pitch and stone and the stubborn determination of people who refused to let their ground fall apart. Inside, Maisie waited with questions written all over her face, but Hannah shook her head and the child went quiet. They ate dinner in silence, the weight of Henderson's visit pressing on them like a physical thing. Afterward, Caleb sat at the table cleaning and checking the kitchen knives with methodical care, while Hannah pretended not to notice how he was turning them into weapons. When Maisie finally went to bed, Hannah sat across from Caleb and poured them both coffee, the last of the grounds, bitter and strong. What happens now? She asked. Now I get strong enough to ride. I find the men who tried to kill me, and I finish what I started. He looked up from the knife he was honing. But not until I know you're safe. We've been safe for 3 years. You've been lucky for 3 years. There's a difference. He set the knife down, his eyes serious. Henderson knows something's off. If he tells the sheriff, if he tells the wrong people in town, they'll come looking, and I won't be able to hide if they search the place properly. Then we don't let them search. Hannah, I mean it. She leaned forward, her voice fierce. This is my land, my home, and nobody comes through that door unless I allow it. Not Henderson, not the sheriff, not the men who shot you. Nobody. Caleb studied her face, and she saw the moment he recognized what she'd already figured out. This wasn't just about protecting him anymore. It was about refusing to be afraid in her own home, refusing to let men with violence and authority take anything else from her. All right, he said finally. Then we prepare. Tomorrow I teach you to shoot properly, and we set up signals, ways to warn each other if someone's coming. And we make a plan for the worst case. What's the worst case? His eyes went dark. The worst case is they come in force, at night, and they're not interested in asking questions. Hannah thought about Maisie sleeping in the loft, about the thin walls and the empty dark, about how far they were from help that would never come in time. Then we make sure they don't get that chance, she said. Caleb nodded slowly, something like respect warming his expression. You're tougher than I thought. When I first saw you, I figured that I was a widow barely holding on, that I'd need rescuing. Hannah's mouth twisted. Everyone thinks that, but I've been holding on for 3 years through drought and debt and men like Henderson who think I should be grateful for their attention. I know how to fight, Caleb. I just usually fight alone. Not anymore. He reached across the table and briefly squeezed her hand, a gesture so quick and natural it was over before she could react. We'll handle this together, whatever comes. The warmth of his touch lingered after he pulled away, and Hannah stared at her hand like it held answers to questions she didn't know how to ask. When she looked up, Caleb was watching her with an expression so raw and unguarded it made her chest ache. I should get some sleep, he said, his voice rougher than before. Big day tomorrow if I'm teaching a widow to outshoot the territory. I already know how to shoot. I'm sure you do. But knowing and being able to hit what you're aiming at when you're scared are different skills. He stood, stretching carefully. Trust me on this one. Hannah wanted to argue but recognized truth when she heard it. She banked the fire, checked the door bolt, and climbed to the loft where Maisie slept curled like a question mark under her blankets. She lay down beside her daughter, listening to the small, even breaths, to Caleb settling on his pallet below, to the Wyoming wind testing the walls and finding them, for now, still strong enough to hold. Sleep came in fragments that night, broken by every sound, the wind against the shutters, a branch scraping the roof, Sundance shifting in his shelter. Hannah lay staring at darkness, her mind turning over Henderson's visit like a puzzle with missing pieces. When dawn finally crept through the gaps in the cabin walls, she rose exhausted and found Caleb already awake, sitting at the table with Thomas's rifle disassembled before him. It's clean, she said, defensive without meaning to be. I know. Just checking the action. His hands moved with practiced efficiency, reassembling the weapon. When's the last time you fired it? Last fall, rabbit for stew. Did you hit it? Eventually. The corner of his mouth lifted. That's what we're fixing today? They waited until mid-morning when the sun had burned off the frost and Maisie was occupied with lessons Hannah had written out on slate. Then Caleb led Hannah away from the cabin, past the fence line to a spot where the land opened up and the nearest neighbor was miles distant. He'd brought 6 tin cans scavenged from Hannah's pantry and set them on fence posts at varying distances. The rifle felt heavy in Hannah's hands, heavier than she remembered, and she was suddenly aware of Caleb standing close behind her, his breath warm against her ear as he adjusted her stance. Feet wider. You're standing like you expect to get knocked down. His hands moved to her shoulders, positioning her. The rifle kicks, but if you're braced right, it won't hurt. Now breathe in, let it half out, and squeeze, don't pull, the trigger. Hannah did as instructed, and the rifle cracked loud in the morning quiet. The nearest can didn't even tremble. Again, Caleb said. You jerked at the last second, anticipating recoil. Don't think about what happens after. Just focus on the moment the bullet leaves. She fired again. The can pinged and tumbled, and satisfaction flooded through her, sharp and unexpected. "There," Caleb said, and she could hear the smile in his voice. "Now you're dangerous." They practiced until Hannah's shoulder ached and her ears rang despite the cloth Caleb had told her to stuff in them. By the time they stopped, she'd hit 4 cans out of 6, and Caleb looked at her with something that might have been approval or might have been concern. She couldn't tell which. "You learn fast," he said, taking the rifle to clean. "That's good. Means if it comes to it, you won't freeze." "I froze when Thomas died." The words came out before Hannah could stop them. He was gasping, drowning in his own lungs, and I just sat there holding his hand because I didn't know what else to do. The doctor said there was nothing to be done, but I keep thinking if I'd been smarter, braver, something. "Hannah." Caleb's voice cut through her spiral. "You loved him, and you stayed with him. That's not freezing. That's the hardest thing a person can do." She looked at him then, at the scar through his eyebrow and the shadows in his eyes, and understood that he knew about staying, about watching people suffer and being powerless to stop it. "Who did you lose?" she asked quietly. His jaw worked. "My father. Range war, 10 years back. I was 18, thought I was tough, thought I could save him if I just fought hard enough. But bullets don't care how tough you think you are." He turned the rifle over in his hands, checking the barrel. "After, I swore I'd never be helpless like that again. Learned to shoot, to fight, to read situations before they went bad. Joined the association because I thought stopping cattle thieves was simpler than stopping death." "Is it?" "No. Turns out everything's complicated, and people die anyway." He handed her the rifle back. "But at least now I can do something about the dying that's preventable." They walked back to the cabin in silence, the weight of shared grief settling between them like a third presence. Maisie met them at the door, her face bright with excitement that dimmed when she saw their expressions. "What's wrong?" the child asked. "Nothing, baby." Hannah forced a smile. "Just tired from practice." "Did you hit the cans?" "Most of them." "Can I learn to shoot?" "When you're older," Hannah and Caleb said simultaneously, then looked at each other in surprise. Maisie giggled, the sound breaking the tension, and Hannah felt something in her chest ease slightly. The afternoon passed in ordinary tasks made strange by the undercurrent of waiting. Hannah worked her garden plot, turning soil that was finally soft enough to take seed, while Caleb repaired another section of fence with Maisie as his enthusiastic assistant. To anyone watching, they would have looked like a family, mother, father, daughter, working their land together. The thought made Hannah's hands still on the hoe. Not a family. Couldn't be. Caleb would leave as soon as he was strong enough, return to his brother and his work and his life that had no room for widows and children. This was temporary, a moment of safety carved from danger, nothing more. She told herself that firmly and tried to believe it. As the sun dropped toward the horizon, casting long shadows across the yard, Caleb straightened from his work and went still. Hannah looked up, reading the tension in his shoulders, and followed his gaze to the road where dust rose in a column too large for a single rider. "Inside," Caleb said, his voice level but urgent. "Now." "How many?" Hannah dropped the hoe, already moving. 4, maybe 5, moving fast. He grabbed Maisie's hand. "Hannah, get the rifle. And whatever happens, you keep Maisie in the loft and you don't come down unless I call for you." "I'm not leaving you to sit." "Yes, you are." His eyes locked on hers, fierce and final. "If they get past me, you shoot through the floor. Aim for noise and movement. Don't hesitate. Don't think. Just shoot. Understand?" Hannah wanted to argue, but the riders were close enough now that she could hear hoofbeats. She nodded, scooped Maisie into her arms, and ran for the cabin. Behind her, Caleb moved with surprising speed for a man still healing, grabbing tools that could serve as weapons, positioning himself between the approaching riders and the door. In the loft, Hannah set Maisie down and pressed a finger to her lips. The child's eyes were huge, but she nodded, understanding without words that this was different from Henderson's visit. This was the danger they'd been preparing for. Hannah loaded the rifle with shaking hands and positioned herself where she could see through the gaps in the floorboards, her heart hammering so hard she thought it might crack her ribs. The riders pulled up in a spray of dust and gravel, 5 of them, faces obscured by bandanas, hats pulled low. They sat their horses in a line, and Hannah recognized the formation, a show of force meant to intimidate. Caleb stood in the yard with a fence post braced against his good shoulder like a staff, looking for all the world like a man who wasn't afraid. "Help you gentlemen with something?" His voice carried clear and cold. The center rider pushed his horse forward a step. "Looking for a friend of ours. Heard he might be in the area." "Don't know your friends. And this is private property, so unless you've got business here, you can move along." "We've got business." The rider's hand rested on his pistol, casual but obvious. "Woman lives here, doesn't she? Widow Mercer. We'd like to talk to her." "The lady doesn't take visitors after dark." "Wasn't asking permission." Another rider spoke up, younger, his voice carrying an edge of excitement that made Hannah's stomach turn. "We know you're here, Hart. Saw the fence work, saw the tracks. You might as well come out." Above, in the loft, Hannah felt Maisie press against her side. She put her arm around her daughter and sighted down the rifle barrel, picking a target. The young one, the excited one who would move first if this went bad. Below, Caleb shifted his weight, and Hannah saw what he was doing, calculating angles, measuring distances, figuring out how to take 5 armed men with a fence post and sheer determination. "Don't know anyone named Hart," Caleb said. "I'm just a hired hand helping the widow with repairs. And like I said, you're on private property." "Hired hand." The center rider laughed, cold and sharp. "That's good. Tell you what, hired hand, you step aside, let us have a conversation with Mrs. Mercer, and maybe we don't burn this place down around your ears." "Or," Caleb said conversationally, "you turn those horses around and ride out while you still can." "While we still can?" The rider's voice rose. "You're one man, barely standing from the look of you, and there's 5 of us. What exactly do you think you're going to do?" "I think I'm going to make you regret coming here." Caleb's voice dropped lower, dangerous. "I think I'm going to make sure at least 3 of you don't leave this yard. And I think your boss is going to be real interested to hear how his men died threatening a widow and child. Association frowns on that kind of thing." The rider shifted, horses dancing, and Hannah saw doubt flicker across the faces she could see. Good. Caleb was playing it smart, making them think, making them hesitate. But the young one was already moving, his hand going for his gun, and everything happened too fast and too slow at once. Caleb swung the fence post like a club, catching the young rider's horse across the nose. The animal reared, screaming, and the rider tumbled backward out of the saddle. Caleb was already moving, diving behind the water trough as guns cracked and bullets tore through air where he'd been standing. Hannah fired through the floor, aiming for the center rider, and the rifle's report in the enclosed space made her ears scream. She didn't know if she hit anything, but the riders scattered, shouting, trying to control panicking horses, and return fire at the same time. Caleb came up from behind the trough with a rock in his hand, just a rock, nothing else, and threw it with vicious accuracy. It caught another rider in the temple, and the man toppled sideways, out cold before he hit the ground. 3 left. The odds were better, but still bad. Hannah chambered another round, sighting on the nearest target, but Maisie's small hand gripped her arm. "Mama, look!" Through the window, Hannah saw lights moving on the road, torches, many of them, and the sound of more horses. For one terrible moment, she thought reinforcements had arrived for the raiders, but then she heard a voice she recognized. "This is Sheriff Coleman. Drop your weapons." The remaining riders froze, caught between Caleb's position and the approaching lawmen. The center rider cursed viciously, wheeled his horse, and bolted. The others followed, thundering away into darkness, leaving 2 of their number unconscious in Hannah's yard. Hannah lowered the rifle, her whole body shaking now that the immediate danger had passed. Below, Caleb stayed behind the trough, not moving until the sheriff himself rode into the yard with 6 deputies flanking him. "Hart? That you behind there?" Caleb stood slowly, his hands visible, and even from the loft Hannah could see he was favoring his shoulder. "Sheriff, appreciate the timing. Got word you might be in trouble. Seems like word was right." Coleman dismounted, a big man gone soft in the middle, but still carrying authority. He looked at the 2 unconscious riders, at the bullet holes in the cabin wall, at Caleb standing there with no weapon except a fence post. "Want to tell me what happened?" 5 riders showed up making threats against Mrs. Mercer. We convinced them to leave. We. Coleman's gaze went to the cabin, and Hannah made a decision. She climbed down from the loft, leaving Maisie above with strict instructions not to move, and stepped out onto the porch with the rifle loose in her hands. "I'm Mrs. Mercer," she said clearly. "These men threatened my daughter and my property. I defended both." Coleman studied her, his expression unreadable. "You know who these men are?" "Never seen them before tonight. But they were looking for Mr. Hart here. They mentioned a name. I told them no one by that name was on my property." Hannah held the sheriff's gaze, her voice steady. "Are you saying I should have let them search my home? Let them threaten my child?" "I'm saying there's going to be questions, ma'am, about why a Cattlemen's Association detective is on your land, about why 5 armed men came looking for him, about what exactly you're involved in here." "I'm involved in keeping my daughter safe," Hannah said flatly. "That's all. Mr. Hart has been helping with repairs in exchange for room and board. The rest is association business, not mine." It was a careful dance, truth and omission woven together, and Hannah could see Coleman weighing her words against what he knew and what he suspected. Finally, he nodded. "All right, for now. But Hart, you and I need to talk. And Mrs. Mercer, you might want to consider staying in town for a few days, until this settles." "This is my home," Hannah said. "I'm not leaving it." "Stubborn woman," Coleman muttered, but without heat. He turned to his deputies. "Get these 2 tied up and loaded. We'll sort them out at the jail." Then, to Caleb, "You come by tomorrow. Bring your ledger. Time to finish what you started." Caleb nodded, and the sheriff and his men departed, taking the unconscious riders with them. The sound of hoofbeats faded into distance, and silence rushed back in like water filling a hole. Hannah sagged against the porch post, her legs suddenly unreliable. Caleb climbed the steps, moving carefully, and she saw blood seeping through his shirt. "You're bleeding." "Pulled some stitches." He said it like it didn't matter, like he hadn't just fought 5 men with a piece of wood. "It'll keep." "The hell it will." "Get inside." She called Maisie down, reassured the frightened child that everything was fine now, then set Maisie to boiling water while she peeled away Caleb's shirt. 3 stitches had torn, and the wound was angry and seeping. Hannah cleaned it with hands that wanted to shake but didn't, her anger building with each swipe of the cloth. "You could have been killed," she said. "But I wasn't. You could have gotten Maisie killed. Could have gotten me killed. Hannah, don't." She pressed the cloth harder than necessary, and he hissed. "Don't tell me it's fine. Don't tell me you had no choice. You stood out there against 5 armed men like you had nothing to lose, and we were right there. We would have lost everything." Her voice cracked, and suddenly she couldn't see through the tears, couldn't breathe through the fear that had been building since the moment she'd seen that dust on the road. Caleb's good hand came up to cup her face, his thumb wiping away tears she hadn't meant to shed. "I'm sorry," he said quietly. "You're right. I wasn't thinking about you and Maisie. I was just thinking about stopping them. That was selfish." "It was brave." "Brave and selfish aren't exclusive." His hand stayed where it was, warm against her skin. "But I meant what I said. I won't let anything happen to you, either of you, even if it means taking stupid risks." Hannah wanted to be angry, wanted to push him away and tell him they didn't need his protection, but the words wouldn't come. Instead, she found herself leaning into his touch, just for a moment, just long enough to feel what it was like to have someone else carry the weight. Then Maisie was there with the boiled water, and the moment broke. Hannah stepped back, cleared her throat, and finished treating the wound with professional efficiency. Caleb didn't mention the tears, and she was grateful for that small mercy. Later, after Maisie had been tucked into bed with extra reassurances and whispered promises that the bad men wouldn't come back, Hannah sat with Caleb by the dying fire and tried to process everything that had happened. "The sheriff knew you were here," she said, "before tonight. That's why he came. Someone told him. Maybe Henderson, maybe someone else." Caleb stared into the flames. "But he came to help, not to arrest me." "That's good." "Is it? Or does it just mean the fight's getting bigger?" "It means it's almost over." He pulled his ledger from the saddlebag, opening it to pages marked with careful notes. "I've been tracking this ring for 8 months. I know how they operate, where they move the cattle, who's buying. What I didn't have was names, but tonight we got faces. The sheriff can identify those two we captured, and once we know who they work for, we can shut the whole operation down." "And then what?" Hannah heard the edge in her own voice. "You ride off to the next job? The next canyon where someone might leave you to die?" Caleb looked at her, and in his eyes she saw the same question she'd been asking herself. What happens after? What do two people do when danger is the only thing holding them together? "I don't know," he admitted. "I've never thought past finishing the job, never had reason to. And now? Now I'm thinking maybe I should." He set the ledger aside, his gaze holding hers. "My brother's been asking me to come home for years. Says the ranch needs me, says family's more important than chasing thieves across the territory. I always told him I'd come when the work was done. But the work's never done, is it? There's always another herd stolen, another family hurt, another fight to pick." Hannah heard what he wasn't saying, that he was tired, that he wanted something different, that maybe he'd found a reason to stop running. "Your brother sounds smart," she said carefully. "He is. Smarter than me, anyway." Caleb's mouth quirked. "He'd like you. He's always saying I need someone stubborn enough to make me listen." "I'm not—" Hannah stopped, unsure what she'd been about to deny. "We barely know each other. I know you saved my life. I know you stood your ground when 5 armed men rode into your yard. I know you love your daughter so fiercely it makes you terrifying." His voice softened. "I know when you smile, really smile, not the polite one you use for people like Henderson. It makes me want to figure out how to earn it again." Hannah's breath caught. She should say something sensible, something that acknowledged reality, that he was leaving, that she had responsibilities, that whatever this was couldn't possibly work. Instead, she said, "You earned it already." The fire popped, sending sparks up the chimney, and in the warm, flickering light, Caleb reached out and took her hand. Not grabbing, not demanding, just holding, his calloused palm against hers, his fingers threading through her fingers, solid and real. "I don't want to leave," he said. "Not yet. Maybe not at all. If there's any chance you might—" "Don't." Hannah squeezed his hand but pulled away, standing up before she could let herself hope for things that seemed impossible. "You're still healing. You've got work to finish. We don't know what's coming next or how this ends. Don't make promises you might not be able to keep." "Hannah, I mean it, Caleb. I can't." She wrapped her arms around herself, feeling cold despite the fire. "I can't survive losing someone else. I barely survived losing Thomas. And Maisie, she's already attached to you, already sees you as someone permanent. When you leave, it's going to break her heart. I need to at least try to protect mine." She climbed to the loft before he could respond, before she could see whatever expression was on his face, and lay down beside Maisie with tears sliding silently into her hair. Below, Caleb sat by the fire alone and stared at his hands, at the scars from old fights, at the calluses from hard work, at the empty spaces where Hannah's fingers had been, and wondered when exactly he'd stopped being the man who never thought past the next job and become the man who wanted to build a life worth staying for. Morning would bring the sheriff and questions and the final push to end this case. But tonight, in this cabin that had become more home than anywhere he'd lived in years, Caleb Hart made a decision. He was done running, done fighting other people's battles, done pretending he didn't need anything except the next horizon. He just had to figure out how to convince Hannah that some promises were worth the risk. Dawn broke cold and clear, the kind of morning that made Wyoming look deceptively peaceful. Hannah woke to find Maisie already dressed and sitting at the loft's edge, her legs dangling over the side, watching Caleb move around the cabin below with quiet efficiency. He'd made coffee, she could smell it, and the fire was already crackling. "He didn't sleep," Maisie whispered when Hannah sat up. "I woke up twice and he was just sitting there, looking at his papers." Hannah peered down and saw the ledger open on the table, pages covered in Caleb's neat handwriting with new notes added in margins. His face looked drawn in the early light, shadows under his eyes, but his movements were steady as he poured coffee into 2 cups. "Morning," he called up without looking. "Sheriff will be here in an hour. Figured we should eat first." Hannah climbed down, leaving Maisie to dress, and accepted the coffee with a nod. The silence between them felt different than yesterday. Not uncomfortable exactly, but weighted with things unsaid. She studied his face, looking for regret or awkwardness after last night's conversation, but found only a quiet determination that made her nervous. Did you figure something out? She gestured to the ledger. Maybe. The two men the sheriff took, if I'm right about who they work for, this whole thing connects back to one person, Marcus Webb. He said the name like it tasted bad. Runs a ranch up near the Montana border, respected, wealthy, sits on the territorial council. Everyone thinks he's legitimate, but you don't. I think he's been using his position to cover the largest rustling operation in Wyoming. Small ranchers lose cattle, Webb's herds mysteriously grow. Brands get altered just enough to pass inspection. The stolen beef gets sold through his connections in Montana and Dakota. Caleb traced a finger over his notes. I've suspected for months, but I couldn't prove it. Now, if those riders talk, if they admit they work for Webb, they won't. Hannah set her cup down. Men like that don't talk. They know what happens to men who do. Then we make them understand that staying silent is worse. His jaw set. The association has ways of encouraging cooperation. That sounds like a threat? It is. He met her eyes. I've been playing this gentle for months, trying to build a case that would hold up legal and proper. But they shot me and left me to die, and last night they came after you and Maisie. I'm done being gentle. The cold finality in his voice should have frightened Hannah, but instead she felt a surge of fierce satisfaction. Men like Webb counted on people being too afraid or too civilized to fight back with real teeth. It was about time someone showed him that wasn't always true. What do you need me to do? She asked. Caleb looked at her for a long moment, something like wonder crossing his face. You mean that? I mean that. They came to my home, threatened my child. Whatever you need to finish this, you have it. Before Caleb could respond, the sound of approaching horses cut through the morning quiet. They both moved to the window and saw Sheriff Coleman riding up with two deputies, the morning sun glinting off badges and rifle barrels. Time to work, Caleb said, grabbing his ledger. He paused at the door, his hand on the latch, and turned back to Hannah. Whatever happens today, thank you for everything. Then he was gone, striding out to meet the lawmen, and Hannah stood at the window feeling like she was watching something shift, not just in Caleb's case, but in the whole fabric of what came next. Maisie appeared at her elbow, pressing close. Is he leaving? Not yet, baby. But soon? Hannah didn't answer because she didn't know, and she refused to lie to her daughter about things that mattered. Instead, she wrapped her arm around Maisie's shoulders, and they watched together as Caleb spread his ledger on the porch rail and began walking the sheriff through months of evidence. The conversation lasted an hour, Coleman's expression growing darker as Caleb talked and pointed to pages. The deputies shifted restlessly, hands near their weapons, and Hannah could read the tension even from inside the cabin. Finally, Coleman nodded sharply, closed the ledger, and shook Caleb's hand with the gravity of men making serious promises. When Caleb came back inside, his face was set in grim satisfaction. They're going to pick up Webb this afternoon. Bring him in for questioning about the riders. Once he's in custody, the rest should fall apart fast. Should? Hannah caught the uncertainty. Webb's smart. He'll have lawyers, alibis, friends in high places. But the riders we caught are small time. They'll break under pressure, especially when they realize Webb isn't coming to save them. Caleb ran a hand through his hair. Coleman's good. He'll make this stick. And what do you do while that's happening? Stay here, out of sight. If Webb knows I'm alive, if he knows I'm the one who connected all the pieces, he might run, or he might come looking to finish what his men started. He met her eyes. I need to ask you something, and you can say no. Ask. The sheriff wants me in town tomorrow to testify when they arraign Webb. It'll take most of the day, maybe longer if things get complicated. I don't like leaving you and Maisie alone, not with this still unsettled. Would you come with me? Stay at the hotel, keep Maisie safe behind locked doors until it's finished. Hannah wanted to refuse on principle. She didn't run, didn't let fear push her off her own land. But she looked at Maisie, at her daughter's serious face and worried eyes, and knew that pride wasn't worth risking what mattered most. All right, she said, but we're taking Sundance. I'm not leaving him here alone if something goes wrong. Relief flickered across Caleb's face. Thank you. They spent the rest of the day preparing, Hannah packing what little they'd need for a night in town, while Caleb checked and rechecked the cabin's defenses like he expected trouble to arrive any moment. He was restless, prowling from window to window, his hand constantly moving to where his gun should be, until Hannah finally grabbed his arm. "You're making Maisie nervous. Sit down." "Can't. Too much that could go wrong." "Then make yourself useful. Help me roll this quilt." He obeyed but badly, his attention divided, and Hannah watched him with growing concern. This wasn't the careful, methodical man who'd spent weeks tracking criminals. This was someone operating on nerves and too little sleep, running on determination alone. "When's the last time you ate?" she asked. "This morning." "It's past noon. You need food." "I'm fine." "You're not fine. You're half-healed and exhausted, and if you don't sit down and eat something, I'm going to hit you with this skillet." She brandished the cast iron for emphasis. "Don't test me, Caleb." Despite everything, his mouth quirked. "You really would hit me." Without hesitation, "Now sit." He sat, and Hannah made him eggs and the last of the bacon, standing over him while he ate with mechanical efficiency. Maisie watched this with fascination, clearly delighted by someone else being on the receiving end of her mother's no-nonsense orders. "Mama bosses everyone," Maisie informed Caleb. "Even the chickens." "The chickens need bossing," Hannah said. "They're anarchists." That surprised a real laugh out of Caleb, breaking some of the tension, and for a moment the cabin felt almost normal. Just 3 people sharing a meal, making jokes about poultry, pretending danger wasn't circling closer with every hour. Afternoon stretched toward evening, and still no word from town. Caleb grew quieter as shadows lengthened, his gaze distant, and Hannah recognized the look of a man preparing himself for violence. She'd seen that same expression on her father's face before he'd gone to fight in the war that took his leg. The same stillness that came from knowing tomorrow might be the day everything changed. They ate dinner in near silence, cleaned up together with careful choreography, and then Maisie asked the question that had been building all day. "What happens after tomorrow?" Caleb set down the plate he was drying and looked at the child with unexpected gentleness. "After tomorrow, the bad men go to jail where they belong. And you and your mama can stop worrying." "But what about you?" Maisie's voice was small. "Do you go to jail too?" "No, little bit. I didn't do anything wrong." "Then where do you go?" The question hung there, and Hannah found herself holding her breath, waiting for an answer she wasn't sure she wanted to hear. Caleb crouched down to Maisie's level, his face serious. "I don't know yet. I have a brother who wants me to come home, help him run our family ranch, and I have a job with the association that needs finishing. There are always more thieves, more families who need protection." "Those aren't real answers," Maisie said with devastating accuracy. "Those are grown-up answers that mean you don't want to tell me the truth." Hannah saw something crack in Caleb's expression, the careful control slipping to show raw uncertainty underneath. He glanced up at Hannah, and she saw the question in his eyes. What answer could he give that wouldn't be a lie? "The truth is," Hannah said quietly, "that sometimes grown-ups don't know what comes next. Sometimes we have to wait and see what feels right when the danger's over." "That's a terrible answer," Maisie announced, but she hugged Caleb anyway, fierce and quick, before running off to the loft. Caleb stood slowly, his shoulder clearly bothering him. Hannah touched his arm, feeling muscle tense under her fingers. "You didn't have to do that," he said. "Do what?" "Give me an out. Let me not promise her something I might not be able to deliver." "I wasn't giving you an out. I was telling the truth." Hannah moved away, busying herself with banking the fire. "We don't know what happens next. And maybe that's all right. Maybe we don't have to know yet." "Hannah." He said her name like a question and an answer at once. "Last night, when you said you couldn't survive losing someone else, I meant it." "I know you did, but what if—" He stopped, choosing words carefully. "What if I'm not someone you'd lose? What if I'm someone who stays?" Her hand stilled on the poker. "You can't promise that." "I can. I am." He moved closer, and she could feel the heat of him at her back, solid and real. "I'm done with the association, Hannah. After tomorrow, after this case closes, I'm going home to my brother's ranch, and I want, if you'd consider, I'd like you and Maisie to come with me." The words should have shocked her, but instead they settled into her chest like something that had been waiting there all along. She turned to face him, and in the firelight his expression was stripped bare of everything except hope and fear in equal measure. "You're asking me to leave my home, my land, everything Thomas and I built." "No," his voice was firm. "I'm asking you to bring it with you. Sell the property, or rent it, or let it sit, whatever you want. But come north with me. The ranch is big enough for all of us, and James has been wanting help for years. We could—" He stopped, swallowed hard. "We could build something good there, all of us together." "You're talking about marriage." Hannah said it flat, making sure they both understood what he was offering. "Eventually, if you want. Or not. We can figure it out as we go. But yes, Hannah, I'm talking about a life together. You, me, Maisie. A real family." She wanted to say yes. The word was right there, pushing at her teeth, demanding release, but fear held it back. Fear of trusting this feeling, fear of what happened if she let herself hope and it all fell apart. "Ask me again after tomorrow," she whispered. "After it's really over. After we know we're both still standing." Disappointment flickered across his face, but he nodded. "After tomorrow, then. That's a promise I can keep." He started to turn away, but Hannah caught his hand, holding him there in the firelight, with her heart hammering and her courage gathered like weapons. "But if you ask me then," she said, "if we're both alive and the danger's really past, the answer will be yes." Caleb's eyes went wide, and then he was pulling her close, careful of his shoulder but fierce in a way that made her breath catch. His forehead pressed against hers, and she could feel him shaking. "I'll keep us alive," he said roughly. "Whatever it takes. I swear it." They stood like that for a long moment, breathing together, and Hannah let herself feel what she'd been fighting, the want, the hope, the terrifying possibility that maybe she could have this, that maybe loss wasn't the only ending her story could have. Then she pulled away, smoothed her skirts, and made her voice practical because one of them had to be. "Tomorrow we go to town early. We get a room at the hotel, we keep Maisie safe, and you do what you need to do. And then we come back here and we figure out what happens next. Agreed?" "Agreed." They prepared for bed with the careful courtesy of people aware they'd crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed. Hannah climbed to the loft where Maisie was already asleep, and as she lay in the darkness she heard Caleb moving below, restless and watchful, standing guard over a home that had somehow become his to protect. She woke once in the deepest part of night to the sound of hoofbeats, distant but distinct. In the cabin below she heard Caleb rise, heard the soft click of a rifle being checked. The horses passed without stopping, heading toward town, and after a long moment Caleb settled again. Hannah lay awake until dawn, her hand on the knife under her pillow, and prayed to whatever God might listen that tomorrow would bring endings, not more loss. Morning came with frost on the windows and tension thick enough to cut. They ate quickly, dressed warmly, and loaded their few belongings onto Sundance's back. The pony seemed to sense the importance of the day, standing still while Maisie tied their bundles with careful knots. Caleb had borrowed a horse from the sheriff, a rangy bay gelding with kind eyes and steady legs. He sat the saddle well despite his healing shoulder, looking more like the range detective he was than the wounded man Hannah had found in the canyon. "Ready?" he asked, and Hannah nodded. They rode out as the sun cleared the horizon, 3 people and 2 horses moving toward whatever tomorrow held, and behind them the cabin stood empty and waiting like a question mark against the Wyoming sky. The ride to Red Rock took 2 hours, and with each mile Hannah felt the weight of civilization pressing closer. They passed other homesteads, saw smoke rising from distant chimneys, met a wagon heading out with supplies. By the time they reached town proper, the streets were already busy with Saturday commerce. Ranchers buying feed, women shopping for goods, children racing between buildings with that particular energy of weekend freedom. Caleb led them to the hotel, a 2-story building that had seen better days but was clean and respectable. He paid for a room with association money, and the clerk's eyes widened when he saw the badge. "Sheriff Coleman said you might be coming in, Mr. Hart. He left word. You're to meet him at the jail soon as you're settled." "Thank you." Caleb took the key and turned to Hannah. "Second floor, corner room. Windows face the street so you can see anyone coming. Keep the door locked. Don't open it for anyone but me or the sheriff." We'll be fine, Hannah said, projecting more confidence than she felt. I know you will. He looked at Maisie. You take care of your mama, all right? I always do, Maisie said seriously, and Caleb's expression softened. He wanted to say something else. Hannah could see it, but instead he just nodded and headed for the jail, leaving them to climb the stairs to a room that smelled of old wood and lye soap. The room was small but adequate, with a double bed, a washstand, and those promised windows. Hannah checked the locks twice, then settled Maisie with a book while she positioned herself where she could watch the street below. Time crawled. She saw Caleb enter the jail with the sheriff, saw deputies coming and going with purposeful strides, saw a fancy carriage arrive mid-morning that could only be Webb's lawyers. The town moved around them, oblivious to the drama unfolding, and Hannah felt the strange disconnection of being at the center of something vital, while appearing to be just another woman waiting in a hotel room. Maisie grew restless by noon, bored with her book and the confinement. Hannah told her stories, played word games, rationed out the food they'd brought, and watched the sun track across the sky with mounting anxiety. It was nearly 3 when she saw it, Caleb emerging from the jail, walking fast, his face grim. He wasn't coming toward the hotel. He was heading for the livery, and even from a distance, Hannah could read urgency in every line of him. Stay here, she told Maisie, already grabbing her shawl. Lock the door behind me. Don't open it for anyone. Mama, now, Maisie! Hannah ran down the stairs, ignoring the clerk's startled look, and caught up with Caleb halfway to the livery. What happened? He spun, hand going to his gun before he recognized her. Hannah, what are you doing out here? You're supposed to be… What happened? She repeated. His jaw worked. Webb's gone. His lawyers showed up, said he was taken ill, couldn't come in for questioning. By the time Coleman sent deputies to his ranch, the place was cleared out. Webb, his men, his records, everything. They ran. Hannah's stomach dropped. How long ago? Maybe an hour. Coleman's organizing a posse, but Webb's got resources, connections. He could be anywhere by now. Caleb's eyes were hard. Or he could be doubling back to tie up loose ends. The men we captured, they talked this morning, gave us everything. Webb knows by now that I'm the one who built the case against him. Knows I'm here, alive, ready to testify. You think he'll come for you? I think he'll come for anyone who can hurt him. That includes you and Maisie. You harbored me. Your witnesses. Your leverage. He grabbed her shoulders. I need you back in that room. Doors locked. Rifle loaded. I'm riding with the posse, but if Webb's smart, he sent men here while we're chasing him north. Fear spiked through Hannah, cold and sharp, but she pushed it down. Then go. We'll be safe. Hannah, go, Caleb. Finish this. We'll be here when you get back. He pulled her close, fast and fierce, his mouth finding hers in a kiss that tasted like promise and desperation. Then he was running for the livery, and Hannah was racing back to the hotel, her heart pounding loud enough to drown out thought. She burst into the room to find Maisie standing frozen by the window, her face white. Mama, there are men outside, 3 of them. They're watching our door. Hannah moved to the window and felt ice flood her veins. 3 riders in the alley behind the hotel, sitting their horses with the patient stillness of men who knew exactly what they were waiting for. Webb hadn't run. Or if he had, he'd left soldiers behind to collect his debts. And Hannah and Maisie were alone. Hannah's mind raced through possibilities, each one worse than the last. The hotel's back stairs led directly to the alley where the riders waited. The front entrance opened onto the main street, but she'd have to cross the entire building with Maisie to reach it, and those men would see them the moment they emerged. They were trapped, and the men outside knew it. Mama? Maisie's voice trembled. What do we do? Hannah forced herself to think past the fear. She had the rifle, loaded and ready. She had the knife at her belt. She had a daughter who needed her to be smart, not just brave. And she had maybe 5 minutes before those riders decided waiting was over. Listen to me carefully, baby. We're going to the clerk downstairs. We're going to tell him to get the sheriff. And then we're going to find a place in this building where we can defend ourselves until help comes. Can you do that? Maisie nodded, her small face set with determination that broke Hannah's heart and made her proud in equal measure. They moved quickly, Hannah keeping Maisie behind her as they descended the stairs. The clerk looked up from his ledger, irritation on his face that shifted to alarm when he saw Hannah's expression. "There are men watching this hotel," Hannah said quietly. "Armed men. You need to get Sheriff Coleman now." "Ma'am, I can't just leave the desk." Hannah set the rifle on the counter with a thunk that made him jump. "Those men are here because of the Webb case. They're here to take me and my daughter. Now you can walk out that front door right now and get the sheriff, or you can stay here and explain to him later why you let a woman and child get kidnapped from your hotel. Your choice." The clerk's Adam's apple bobbed. He grabbed his coat and ran. Hannah picked up the rifle and looked around the lobby. The hotel was old, built in the days when Indian raids were a real threat, and she could see the bones of its defensive past: thick walls, narrow windows, a storage room behind the desk with a heavy door. Not perfect, but better than being caught in the open room upstairs. "In here." She pushed Maisie toward the storage room, then turned to drag a heavy chair in front of the lobby door. It wouldn't stop anyone determined, but it would slow them down, give her seconds to react. The storage room was windowless and cramped, stacked with linens and cleaning supplies. Hannah positioned herself in the doorway where she could see both the front entrance and the stairs to the second floor, the rifle braced against her shoulder. Maisie crouched behind her, pressed against the wall, breathing fast but silent. Minutes passed like hours. Hannah's arms began to ache from holding the rifle ready, her heart hammering so hard she thought it might crack her ribs. She strained to hear anything over the blood rushing in her ears: footsteps, voices, the creak of floorboards that would signal someone coming. The front door rattled once, testing, then harder. "Mrs. Mercer?" a voice called, deceptively pleasant. "We know you're in there. We don't want trouble. Just come out and talk to us." Hannah said nothing, her finger on the trigger, every muscle coiled tight. "Your man Hart, he's caused our boss a lot of problems. We're just here to have a conversation about that. Make sure everyone understands the situation." Still, Hannah stayed silent, and behind her she felt Maisie's small hand grip the back of her dress. The pleasantness dropped from the man's voice like a mask. "You're making this harder than it needs to be. We can wait. We can burn this place down around you, or you can be smart and open this door." "I've got a better idea," Hannah called back, her voice steady despite the fear clawing at her throat. "You right away now, before the sheriff gets here, and maybe you don't hang for threatening a woman and child." Harsh laughter answered her. "Sheriff's chasing ghosts 10 miles north. By the time he gets back, this'll be done and we'll be gone." The door crashed inward. The chair Hannah had braced against it, splintering like kindling. 2 men came through, guns drawn, and Hannah fired without thinking, pure instinct taking over. The rifle's crack was deafening in the enclosed space, and the first man went down with a scream, clutching his leg. The second man dove for cover behind the desk, returning fire, and Hannah pulled Maisie deeper into the storage room as bullets tore chunks from the doorframe. Wood splinters flew, and she felt one slice across her cheek, hot and sharp. "Mama!" Maisie's cry was terrified, and Hannah wrapped herself around her daughter, shielding her with her own body as she tried to reload the rifle with shaking hands. "I'm fine, baby, I'm fine. Stay down." More shots, and Hannah heard the sound of boots on the stairs, the third man coming from the back, trying to trap them. They were caught between no way out, and desperation flooded through her sharp and cold. She couldn't die here. Couldn't let Maisie grow up without her. Couldn't let these men win. Couldn't break the promise she'd made to Caleb to be here when he got back. Hannah fired blind around the doorframe, not aiming, just buying time. The rifle clicked empty, and she dropped it, drawing the knife from her belt. It was a poor weapon against guns, but it was what she had, and she'd die with it in her hand before she'd surrender. "Last chance, Mrs. Mercer," the man behind the desk called. "Throw out the knife and come out. We won't hurt the girl if you cooperate." Lies. She could hear it in his voice, the same tone men used when they promised horses were gentle and land was fertile and widows were safe alone. Hannah tightened her grip on the knife and prepared to sell her life as dearly as she could. Then the front door exploded inward again, and Caleb was there. He came through like a storm, like something wild and furious given human shape. His first shot took the man behind the desk between the eyes. His second caught the man on the stairs in the chest, and he was moving before either body hit the ground, his gun swinging toward the wounded man on the floor. "Don't," Caleb said, and the word carried such cold promise that the man froze, his weapon half raised. "Give me a reason, please." The man dropped his gun, hands raised, blood pooling beneath his shattered leg. Caleb didn't lower his weapon, didn't take his eyes off the room until Sheriff Coleman came through the door with 4 deputies at his back. Only then did he turn toward the storage room, and Hannah saw his face go white. "Hannah, your face!" She touched her cheek and her fingers came away bloody. "It's nothing, just a scratch." Her voice sounded strange to her own ears, too distant, like it belonged to someone else. "How did you know?" "Saw them from the livery." Recognized one of the horses from the canyon. He crossed to her in 3 strides and pulled her into his arms, careful of Maisie crushed between them. "I'm sorry. God, Hannah, I'm so sorry. I should have stayed, should have protected you. You did protect us." Hannah's hands fisted in his shirt, holding on while her legs remembered how to work. "You came back. That's what matters." Around them, deputies were hauling the wounded man to his feet, checking the bodies, securing the scene. Coleman approached, his expression grim. "Mrs. Mercer, Mr. Hart, you both all right?" "We're fine," Hannah said, though fine seemed like the wrong word for the aftermath of violence, for the bodies on the floor and the smoke in the air and the way she couldn't stop shaking now that the danger had passed. "Good, that's good." Coleman looked at the destruction, at the splintered door and bullet-marked walls. "We got Webb. Caught him 5 miles out trying to cross into Montana. He's in custody now, and with what happened here, with these men attacking you, that's attempted murder, kidnapping, conspiracy. He'll hang for this." "And his operation?" Caleb asked, his arms still around Hannah and Maisie. "Finished. We've got names, locations, buyers. The whole network's going to collapse." Coleman shook his head. "But you did good work, Hart. Dangerous work, but good." "I had help." Caleb looked down at Hannah, and something in his expression made her breath catch. "More help than I deserved." The sheriff cleared his throat. "Well, I'll need statements from all of you, but that can wait until tomorrow. For tonight, I suggest you folks find somewhere quieter to rest. Maybe somewhere without quite so many bullet holes." He left them there in the wreckage of the hotel lobby, and Hannah realized she was still holding the knife in her other hand. She looked at it, Thomas's knife, the one she'd carried for 3 years, and very carefully set it down. "Mama, can we go home now?" Maisie's voice was small, muffled against Hannah's skirt. "Soon, baby, soon." But first they had to deal with the aftermath, answering questions, giving descriptions, watching as bodies were carried out, and the wounded man was taken to the jail to await trial. The hotel manager appeared, surveyed the damage with resignation, and told them their room would be free for the week if they needed it, payment for the trouble. By the time they finally climbed the stairs, the sun was setting, and exhaustion had settled into Hannah's bones like winter cold. Maisie fell asleep almost immediately, curled up on the bed still in her dress, and Hannah didn't have the heart to wake her to change. She sat by the window, watching the street below where normal life continued, and tried to process what had happened. She'd shot a man. She'd been ready to die fighting. She'd held her daughter while bullets flew, and somehow, impossibly, they'd both survived. The door opened quietly and Caleb entered, carrying a tray with food and a bottle of whiskey. He set it on the small table and pulled a chair close to Hannah's, not touching but near enough that she could feel his warmth. "You should eat," he said. "Not hungry." "I know, but you need to anyway." He poured whiskey into 2 cups, handed her one. "Drink this first. It'll help." Hannah drank, the liquor burning down her throat and settling in her stomach like liquid courage. She drank again, and the shaking finally started to ease. "I killed a man today," she said quietly. "I shot him, and he fell, and I didn't feel anything except glad that he'd stopped moving. That's normal. After." Caleb's voice was gentle. "The feeling comes later. Guilt, doubt, questions about whether you had to, whether there was another way. But Hannah, you need to hear me. You did what you had to do. You protected yourself and Maisie. That's not murder. That's survival." Thomas would be horrified. Thomas would be proud. Caleb turned her chair so she faced him, his hands on the armrests, his eyes serious. "Your husband sounds like he was a good man, and good men understand that sometimes the world forces choices on us we'd never make otherwise. You think he'd want you dead rather than fighting? You think he'd blame you for keeping his daughter safe?" Hannah's eyes burned. No, he'd want us alive, whatever it took. Then that's what you did, whatever it took. He reached up and gently cleaned the cut on her cheek with a cloth dipped in whiskey, his touch careful. This is going to scar a little. Good. I'll remember. Remember what? That I'm stronger than I thought I was. That I can fight when I need to. That I don't have to be afraid of my own life. She caught his hand, holding it against her face. You asked me something last night. About coming north with you. About building something together. Caleb went very still. I did. I'm saying yes. The words came out firm, certain, and Hannah felt something settle in her chest that had been restless for 3 years. I'm selling the homestead or renting it or letting it sit empty. I don't care which. But I'm not going back there alone. I'm coming with you, if the offer still stands. Hannah, he said her name like a prayer, like an answer, like everything he'd been too afraid to hope for. Are you sure? This morning you said, this morning I was afraid of losing someone again. But today I almost died, and the only thing I could think about was that I'd never told you I loved you. She saw him flinch, saw wonder and fear cross his face in equal measure. I do love you, Caleb Hart. I think I started loving you the moment you woke up in my cabin, and the first thing you did was worry about bringing danger to my door. And I'm tired of being afraid, tired of protecting myself from feeling things. I want to live, really live, and I want to do it with you. He kissed her then, both hands cradling her face, his mouth gentle despite the desperation she could feel vibrating through him. When he pulled back, his eyes were suspiciously bright. I love you too. Have since you held a knife on me and told me you'd drag me inside by my ear if I tore my stitches. He laughed, the sound rough. I've never had a home, not really. Not since my parents died. Just places to sleep between jobs, temporary rooms that never meant anything. But these weeks in your cabin with you and Maisie, that felt like home, like something worth fighting for. Then fight for it. Hannah tangled her fingers in his hair, pulling him close. Fight for us. Stay. I'm not going anywhere. He kissed her again, deeper this time, and Hannah felt 3 years of grief and loneliness crack open to let in light. I'm staying, forever, if you'll have me. Forever sounds about right. They sat together as darkness fell completely, sharing whiskey and making plans in low voices so they wouldn't wake Maisie. Caleb would finish his testimony, make sure Webb's prosecution was airtight, then formally resign from the association. Hannah would arrange to sell the homestead to a young couple she knew who'd been saving for land. They'd give her a fair price and take care of the place Thomas had built. And then they'd head north to Caleb's family ranch, where his brother James was waiting with space for all of them and work that needed doing. James is going to love you, Caleb said. He's been telling me for years I needed someone stubborn enough to make me think about consequences. I'm extremely stubborn. I've noticed. His smile was soft. Fair warning, the ranch is rough country, hard winters, long summers, not much in the way of society or convenience. Sounds like every place I've ever lived. Hannah leaned into him, letting her head rest on his shoulder. As long as there's room for Sundance and Maisie can run wild occasionally, we'll manage. Plenty of room. 20,000 acres, give or take. Maisie can run wild for days without hitting a boundary. He paused. There's a school 10 miles from the main house. She'd have to board during the week in winter, but we'll figure it out. Hannah squeezed his hand. One crisis at a time. First we get through tomorrow. Then we go home, your home, our home, and we start building. Building what? Whatever we want. She lifted her head to look at him. A life, a family, something that lasts. His eyes held hers, and in them she saw the same fierce hope she felt burning in her own chest. The hope of people who'd survived the worst and were determined to make something beautiful from the wreckage. When should we get married? He asked. Is that a proposal? Hannah Mercer, will you marry me? He said it formal and serious, like vows, and she felt tears prick her eyes. Yes, but not yet. She saw confusion cross his face and hurried to explain. I want to marry you in the place we're going to call home. With your brother there and Maisie old enough to remember it. I want it to be the beginning of our life together, not the ending of this chapter. Understanding dawned. You want time to adjust, to make sure this is real before we make it permanent. I know it's real, but I also know we fell in love during a crisis, and I want to love you in peacetime too. Want to see what we're like when no one's shooting at us. She touched his face. Is that all right? More than all right. That's smart. He turned his head to kiss her palm. We'll do this right. Court properly, even though we're already living together. Give Maisie time to adjust. Give you time to grieve leaving your home, even if you're choosing to leave. And when we're both ready, we'll stand in front of God and James and whoever else wants to watch, and we'll make it official. Deal. They sealed it with another kiss, and then Caleb carried Hannah to the other chair so he could stretch out on the floor beside Maisie's bed, keeping watch even though the danger was past. Hannah protested, but he insisted. Old habits, he said. Give me time to learn how to sleep without expecting ambush. So Hannah let him keep his vigil, and she dozed in the chair with her hand hanging down where he could reach it, their fingers loosely tangled, and for the first time in 3 years she slept without nightmares. Morning brought bureaucracy, statements to sign, testimony to give, forms to file with the association documenting the case's resolution. Hannah and Maisie sat in the sheriff's office for hours while Caleb walked Coleman through every detail of his investigation, every piece of evidence he'd gathered, every connection he'd made that proved Webb's guilt. Marcus Webb himself was brought through in chains at one point, a distinguished man in his 50s with silver hair and cold eyes that lingered on Hannah with calculation that made her skin crawl. But Caleb stepped between them, his body language pure threat, and Webb looked away. You'll pay for this, Hart, Webb said as deputies led him past. You and that widow both. You've made enemies you can't imagine. I imagine just fine, Caleb said calmly, and by this time next week, you'll be in a territorial prison where the only thing you'll be making is license plates. Webb's face twisted with rage, but the deputies hauled him away before he could respond, and Caleb turned to Hannah with something like satisfaction in his eyes. It's done. Really done. How long until trial? Month, maybe 2, but Coleman has everything he needs. Webb's own men are testifying against him in exchange for lighter sentences. The evidence is airtight. He took her hand. We can leave. Soon as you're ready. Hannah thought about the homestead waiting empty, about the years she'd spent there loving Thomas and raising Maisie and surviving alone. Thought about what it would mean to close that door and walk through a new one. I'm ready now, she said. Let's go home. They collected Sundance from the livery, purchased supplies for the journey north, and by noon they were riding out of Red Rock with the whole town watching. Hannah felt eyes on her back, speculation, judgment, curiosity about the widow who'd fought off kidnappers and was leaving with the range detective who'd brought down Marcus Webb. Let them talk. She was done living her life for other people's approval. The ride to the homestead took most of the afternoon, and when the cabin came into view, Hannah felt her throat tighten. It looked smaller than she remembered, more fragile, the fence line sagging again already, and the garden plot still waiting for spring planting that wouldn't come. You want to stay the night here? Caleb asked gently. Hannah shook her head. No, I want to pack what matters and leave. The longer I stay, the harder it'll be. They worked quickly, Hannah sorting through possessions with ruthless efficiency, keeping only what had real meaning or utility. Thomas's tools went in one pile, her mother's quilt in another, Maisie's few toys and books in a third. The furniture they'd leave, the pots and pans that could be replaced, the accumulated debris of years that meant nothing without the people who'd used them. Maisie helped, carrying things to Sundance's packs, her small face serious. Are we really never coming back? Probably not, baby. Hannah crouched down to her daughter's level. But that doesn't mean we're forgetting this place. Your father and I were happy here. You were born here. It'll always be part of us. But we'll be happy in the new place too? Yes, I promise. Because Caleb will be there? Hannah glanced at Caleb, who was carefully packing Thomas's tools like they mattered, because to her they did, and that meant they mattered to him too. Because Caleb will be there, what? Hannah confirmed. And because we'll be starting fresh, all of us together. Maisie thought about this, then nodded. Okay, I'm ready. By sunset, they'd packed everything that fit, and Hannah took one last walk through the empty cabin. She touched the mantel where Thomas had carved their initials, the door frame where they'd marked Maisie's height each birthday, the window where she'd watched countless mornings dawn. Thank you, she whispered to the walls, to the memories, to the ghost of the man she'd loved. Thank you for giving me the strength to survive. I'll take care of our daughter. I'll be happy, I promise. She felt no answer, but she didn't need one. Thomas was gone, and she'd carried him as long as she could. It was time to set down that weight and pick up something new. Caleb waited on the porch with Maisie, the horses loaded and ready. He didn't ask if she was all right, just took her hand when she joined them, and together they rode away from the homestead as stars began to appear overhead. They camped that night under open sky, and Maisie fell asleep between them, exhausted from the day's emotions. Hannah lay on her bedroll watching the fire, and Caleb mirrored her across the flames. You all right? He asked quietly. I will be. And she would. The grief was there, but it felt different now, cleaner, like something she could carry without it crushing her. Tell me about the ranch, about what we'll do when we get there. So Caleb talked, his voice low and warm, painting pictures of mountains and meadows, of cattle that needed tending and horses that needed training, of a brother who was waiting and a house big enough for all of them with room left over. He talked about seasons and work, about hard winters and beautiful summers, about building a life that mattered. And Hannah listened and let herself imagine it. Imagine waking up in that house, drinking coffee on that porch, watching Maisie grow up with space to run and family around her. Imagine years stretching ahead filled not with survival, but with living. It sounds perfect, she said. It's not. It's rough and isolated, and some years the work nearly kills us. Caleb's smile was visible even across the fire. But it's honest, and it's ours. And now it'll be yours too. Ours, Hannah corrected, all of us together. They rode north for 5 days, the landscape changing from Wyoming plains to Montana mountains, the air growing cooler and pine-scented. Maisie chattered with increasing excitement, pointing out every new thing, a waterfall, an elk herd, rock formations that looked like sleeping giants. And with each mile, Hannah felt the weight of the past 3 years lift a little more, replaced by anticipation for what came next. On the afternoon of the 5th day, they crested a ridge, and Caleb pulled his horse to a stop, pointing down into a valley where a sprawling ranch house sat beside a creek, barns and corrals spreading out around it like satellites. That's home, he said simply. Hannah looked at the ranch, at the cattle dotting distant pastures, at smoke rising from the house's chimney, and felt something click into place in her chest. Not just acceptance, but belonging. The sense of having found something she hadn't known she was searching for. It's beautiful. Wait until winter, Caleb said, but he was smiling. You'll curse me and the snow both. They rode down the ridge, and halfway to the house a man emerged, tall and broad-shouldered, older than Caleb, but with the same eyes and same serious mouth. He stood watching them approach, and when they were close enough, Hannah saw tears tracking down his face. You stubborn son of a bitch, James Hart said roughly. Thought you were dead. Almost was. Caleb dismounted and embraced his brother with the fierce awkwardness of men who loved each other, but didn't know how to say it. James, this is Hannah Mercer, and her daughter, Maisie. Hannah, my brother James. James turned to Hannah, his eyes red but his smile genuine. Ma'am, any woman who can put up with Caleb's nonsense and get him to finally come home is welcome here always. Thank you. Hannah dismounted, helping Maisie down. We appreciate the hospitality. Hospitality nothing. Caleb said in his telegram you're staying. That means your family. James crouched down to Maisie's level. You must be Maisie. I've got a horse I think would be just your size if you want to meet her. Maisie looked at Hannah, who nodded, and then the child was following James toward the barn, chattering about Sundance and asking questions faster than the man could answer. Caleb moved to Hannah's side, his arm sliding around her waist. What do you think? Hannah looked at the ranch, at James and Maisie disappearing into the barn, at Caleb's face open and hopeful beside her. She thought about the homestead she'd left behind, about Thomas and the life they'd built, about 3 years of survival and loneliness. And then she thought about tomorrow and the day after, and all the days stretching ahead filled with work and family and love earned through choice rather than circumstance. "I think," she said slowly, "that we're home." Caleb kissed her temple, his arm tightening. "Yeah, we are." They stood there as the sun dropped toward the mountains, painting the valley in shades of gold and copper, and Hannah let herself feel it, not just hope, but certainty. The canyon had almost taken everything from her. Instead, it had given her exactly what she needed: a man who saw her strength, a future worth fighting for, and the courage to choose life over mere survival. Behind them, Sundance nickered and Maisie's laughter rang out from the barn. Ahead, the ranch house waited with its door open and lights beginning to glow in windows. And beside her, Caleb stood steady and sure, his hand finding hers as naturally as breathing. The stranger in the canyon had become family. The widow's empty home had been traded for one filled with possibility. And Hannah Mercer, who'd spent 3 years believing her story had ended, discovered instead that it was only just beginning. 6 months later, on a clear autumn morning with leaves turning gold in the aspens and the first frost silvering the grass, Hannah stood on the ranch house porch, wearing a dress Caleb's sister-in-law had helped her sew from fabric ordered special from Denver. Maisie stood beside her in matching blue, holding a bouquet of late wildflowers, and James waited with Caleb near the creek where water sang over stones. The ceremony was simple. A traveling preacher James had summoned, words spoken in open air with mountains as witnesses. When the preacher asked if Hannah took this man, she looked at Caleb and saw everything they'd survived together, everything they'd built in the months since arriving at the ranch, everything they'd promised to become. "I do," she said clearly, and meant it with every fiber of her being. Caleb's hands shook when he slipped the ring on her finger, simple gold, nothing fancy, but warm and solid and real. And when the preacher declared them married and Caleb kissed her, she tasted not desperation or fear, but joy, pure and uncomplicated. Maisie whooped, and James laughed, and Sundance, who'd been given free run of the ceremony despite protests, whinnied his approval from where he'd been nibbling grass near the creek. That night, after dinner and toasts, and Maisie finally asleep in her new room, Hannah and Caleb stood on the porch, watching stars emerge overhead. The ranch spread around them, peaceful and prosperous, the work of their hands and hearts. "Happy?" Caleb asked, pulling her close. Hannah thought about where she'd been a year ago, alone, frightened, certain her life was over. Thought about the golden pony who'd led her to a dying man in a canyon, about the choice to save rather than abandon, about all the moments that had brought her to this place. "Happier than I ever thought possible," she said truthfully. "You?" "Complete." He kissed the top of her head. "For the first time in my life, I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be." They stood together as Wyoming gave way to Montana darkness, as the ranch settled into night around them, and Hannah felt the last pieces of her old life let go. She'd been a daughter, a wife, a widow, a survivor. Now she was something new, a woman who'd chosen her own path, who'd found love in the last place she expected, who'd learned that sometimes the canyon doesn't just take. Sometimes, if you're brave enough to look, it gives back more than you ever lost. And in the distance, barely audible over the wind, a coyote called to its mate. A sound like loneliness answered, like two voices finding harmony in the dark, like coming home after a long journey to discover you've finally become who you were always meant to be.